Hi, Jay. Not sure whether we've met formally before, but hi.
Hey, Trishan, how's it going?
Good, thanks. How about yourself?
Not too bad, man. Not too bad. We have not formally met.
Great, good to finally meet you. So I'm Trishank. I'm a staff security engineer here at Datadog, and I'm passionate about supply chain security, like yourself.
Yeah,
I
same
imagine.
here. Passionate about supply. Actually, I'm passionate about all of information security.
Aren't we all? Yeah.
The administrative, technical, and physical stuff. And I played in every single part of those throughout my entire career. I'm a security principal program manager at Microsoft.
Nice.
My rhyme or reason is how we play in open source, and mainly in the OpenSSF. So
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I'm excited to see Microsoft and friends, coming together to collaborate here. So it's great.
no, this is wonderful, man. What I've been able to see over the last 8 months or so, and then just that evolution in such a short period of time, and of course the whole year that has been the OpenSSF. I think it's absolutely wonderful, man. I mean, I'm so I feel privileged and I feel honored every time I get on one of these calls because there's so much of us in the room together working on this stuff. It's amazing.
Yeah. Same, yeah. You put it so beautifully. I can't improve on it. So.
Yeah.
Cool. Are you based in Seattle?
Nope, I'm in San Bruno, California.
Okay.
My team is scattered, but yeah, home base I guess for the team would be in Redmond. But yeah, I work remote. Yeah.
We're going to give it a few minutes for some of our folks to join. And while folks are joining, feel free to add your attendance to the meeting notes.
Oh, that's
nice. As well as Trishank, I think you're adding that to the template.
Yes. I just realized.
Yeah, so feel free to add your meeting notes to the attendance, as well as anything you want to add to the agenda. I'll be back in just a minute.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Yeah, I guess we could get started. Just as a reminder, if anybody who's joining now, feel free to add your attendance to the meeting notes, as well as any agenda items, and we can get started. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. It'll be uploaded to YouTube shortly after, and your participation in this meeting is an agreement to abide by the OpenSSF Code of Conduct. First things first, I'm not sure, but is there anybody new on the call who wants to introduce themselves?
Yeah, I'm new to this call, this forum. Matt Speakerman with Dow, responsible for application security within our security department, and but just been keeping close to some of the work that's being done with SLSA. So I thought I would try to get a little bit closer.
Say hi, myself, David Zenzian with VMware. I am in a field role these days, but I spent 30 years doing security, and many of those as an auditor in various financial spheres. And I've been following SLSA for a while now. I'm super excited to have time to just, for now, listen and see how it's going, but eventually contribute as I'm able.
Cool. Glad to have you both. All right. If there's nobody else, we can get to sort of updates from the special interest groups specification. Mark, do you want to take that?
Sure. So progress continues on the 1.0 spec work. We've discussed various topics within the meetings, and we're making progress on the writing, like the drafting of the text. But I don't think there's anything big enough to warrant discussion at this group. If you have questions, I'm always happy to answer them. There's also an early draft of a 1.0 provenance format that hopefully addresses various feedback or various issues that we've had in the current version. It's like still marked as a draft pull request. Don't take it as like this is definitely what it's going to be. But so far feedback has been pretty positive. If you have opinions or thoughts on the format, I'd certainly love to hear them. That's basically anyone else's spec meeting. I don't think there's, looking through the notes, I don't think there's anything else that kind of warrants bringing up here. Oh, in terms of timeline, because this come up, obviously it's taking much longer than expected, as most software projects do. The plan is to, once we get it into a good enough state that it's like readable by the community at large, we'll have a review period of, I would say, at least a month, where community members can look at it, make sure, kind of test it, make sure it's really meeting the needs, we don't have any major issues, et cetera. And then we'll mark it as final. Right now, the 1.0 thing is not linked from the main site. You just have to type that in the URL bar because we don't want people going there because it's in kind of a state of flux right now. Once it's in a good enough state that people could actually review it, then we'll start linking it, still calling it a draft. And then once we, as a community, not just the specification SIG, but the whole group, kind of the consensus is that it's good, then we'll mark it as final. That's it from my side.
Cool. Is there anybody from the positioning meeting who wants to give an update? I know Melba isn't available. I mean, if not, I can give the quick update from the couple of meetings I've been attending. So I know that their positioning meeting is working on sort of a big blog for the SLSA 1.0 specification, focused on stuff like developer use cases and the problems it's trying to solve, and really kind of trying to highlight how different users should be using SLSA and how they should be viewing it and all that stuff. And it looks like Melba added the link to the draft of that blog. feel free to take a look there. There's a few other things that I believe have been pushed off for now. One of the things was some of the additional sort of collaboration between different other working groups, like the Cloud Native Controls Working Group, like to start doing mapping of controls between Cloud Native and SLSA and other sorts of specs. But I believe that's been sort of just put on hold until SLSA 1.0 is finalized, as well as there's a bunch of work that's being done from the OSCAL side that might be another few months before it's done. So kind of just holding off to see where things are going to go there before diving too far in. That's what I know from at least the positioning group. I don't know if anybody else has any updates from it.
Yeah, I'll add. So yes to everything that Michael just said. Also, we're due to have another meeting here probably after the holiday, but Melba, Isaac and I have we've had our first meeting regarding position, regarding how positioned or how well positioned, and then of course continuing the efforts of positioning SLSA and S2C2F together. So those meetings have commenced as well, and we're still ironing things out as far as that's concerned. But that falls in line with trying to decide whether we're maintaining two separate positioning meetings, or if we're going to combine in terms of like having a bridged SLSA and S2C2F positioning meeting, or maybe do all three. So that's in addition to discussions being had in the positioning meeting as well.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. The update there. So the cooling meeting, I can provide some updates there. It's been a bit quiet the past couple of weeks because of a combination of KubeCon prep as well as KubeCon fatigue. And I know also with a bunch of the other like events coming up, a lot of folks are still focused on those, like there's Open Source Summit Japan, which is in a couple of weeks. And then a couple of weeks after that is Cloud Native Security Con, the standalone event in Seattle. And then like a month or two after that is KubeCon EU. So I know a lot of those CFPs are closing in quite quickly. And I know a lot of folks are prepping for sort of talks on that and whatnot. But one of the other big focuses that we have is trying to also build, like make sure two things. One is make sure that tools are going to be like a lot of the common tools that we have are going to be ready for SLSA 1.0. So we're just sort of following the spec and making sure that, you know, once the spec is sort of finalized, even as a draft, we can add some features to the various tools to make sure that it supports them. So that's going to require like PRs to some tools like Tecton chains and the various SLSA generators and all that. Also, one of the things that was brought up was we should be sort of building a SLSA validator, like even just like a super simple, like, hey, because this is actually a common problem in the SBOM space, is a lot of the tools that are generating SBOMs that are claiming to be Cyclone DX or SPDX are actually like, you know, it mostly matches the spec, and that's making consumption of some of those SBOMs really difficult because it's hard to rely on. So I think it'd be worthwhile to, you know, really have something that, you know, can really enforce it, and so that, you know, you can run against all the, you know, SLSA stuff that gets generated by something, and essentially verify that yes, it's a correct URI for the builder, not just a string or whatever, because that sort of stuff is going to cause a lot of issues for the tools that consume it. So I think that's one thing that we're looking at, as well as potentially something like a library or a set of libraries that can then support that. Shashank?
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful. But unless I missed something, the spec says that you may use the in toto provenance format? Not necessarily, so that might complicate things a little bit, but yeah, it's certainly better than nothing. Most people are probably going to follow the format.
Yeah, that's true. Sorry, I should say that it's more for the specification for the in toto attestation format. And I think that's the important piece, because most of the built-in tools are all supporting that as the format. But yeah, good point. And then one of the other focuses is still on identifying gaps in the sort of just SLSA ecosystem, like aggregation tools. We know that there's some stuff like Guac and a few other things that are starting to come out there, but we're still sort of like looking at what else there is for not just the generation of SLSA, which there's a lot of tools that are coming out of that, but also tools that can consume SLSA beyond just like some simple like policy validation of what's in the SLSA document. Cool.
Yeah, Michael, I mean, just to follow up to what you guys just talked about, the validator, I mean, in a way, it couldn't, given the way the specification is written, you couldn't claim that this is the only way to, ensure that you're compliant or not. But I think, in fact, there is value in limiting the options on the tool level, because it will be an incentive for people who are actually trying to implement SLSA. And if they have this tool available, they'll try to use it because their interest to try to make sure they are not missing anything, which I think is in the interest of everybody, because the fewer variations we have in how it is implemented in the end, the better we are going to be, I believe.
Yeah, I agree. And I know, Mark, this is something that's been brought up multiple times in the specification meeting as well. Where does it make sense to say maybe something along the lines of SLSA 1, it's not required to use the spec, but maybe SLSA 2 or SLSA 3, it is 100% required? Or do we still want to say, no, we want to make sure that it's flexible?
So my thinking is around interoperability, that maybe we could define, like, in order to be like the interoperable version of SLSA, which would be used for like open source, I guess, maybe you must use that particular format. You could also apply SLSA purely within an organization. And for there, I don't see the justification for requiring that. Like, if one company decides I'm going to use this other format because it fits our needs, as long as it like ticks all the boxes, it seems like that should be okay to me, where there's no interoperability concern. And they might not be able to use standard tooling. They might not be able to interop outside the organization, but if that's what they choose, it seems okay to me. I don't know. What do you think, Arno?
So I think it is okay. I think they are setting themselves for trouble. I mean, I'm an old standards guy, so I apologize here, but my experience is standards are needed because there are plenty of companies that have tried to just get a monolithic approach to a problem, but with merge and acquisitions, if nothing else, you may decide to set up on yourself on one particular approach, but eventually you acquire another company that made a different choice, and now you have an interoperability problem anyway. So I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying, Mark. I think it's totally reasonable to say there are different ways to implement it, and we should allow for that. I do think that if we provide the tools to do it in a specific way, without mandating that you use those tools, it will be an extra incentive for people to use those rather than something else. And I think, as I was trying to say earlier, I think the whole world will be that much better off. That's all.
I agree. Yeah, I just wanted to add the point that from my experience, what I've seen is that there's often confusion between the sort of metadata you require, say URIs and stuff like that, and the formats that you transport this metadata in. So I think SLSA has been very good in being careful about saying, I think that's largely the intention. I think everyone wants to share the same metadata, right? But I think people are going to probably transport it in different ways. Some are going to use XML, some are going to use JSON, some are going to use DISI, some are not going to use DISI. So I think it's important to be able to accommodate all of that. But that's just my 2 cents. Michael's next, I think.
Yeah. So 2 things. One is I agree with Arno on a lot of that as well, which is just a lot of folks. I think by and large everybody is using in Toto anyway. At least what we've seen in the public space. I agree that like we don't necessarily, I agree that maybe even just saying, hey, it's not required, but all the tools are going to be supporting mostly this one, unless something else comes along, might be a good way to just sort of settle that. I also agree with what you said, Trishang, which is a lot of folks are going to want to distribute it in different ways, especially when it comes to stuff like the envelope that might be signing it and yada yada. And I think that there's a lot of interesting stuff there. And I know one of the things that's been I don't necessarily think it's something we have to talk about here, but something that maybe should be talked about in either maybe the supply chain integrity working group or something like that is there's been a lot of discussion about an ontology around some of this stuff, right? Like a lot of folks are coming in and saying, hey, with stuff like how eventually S2C2F and similar sorts of things are coming in, and like how everything is kind of going to be named and whatever. There's some folks are asking also similar questions of like, I might be taking some of this information from an XML document and translating it to something else, and yeah, there might be a lot of this translation, and I think we just kind of want to make sure that we're not like I think the individual tools can't support the entire universe, but making sure that it's easily translatable between, and I know there's lots of tools out there that can translate between XML and JSON and XML, but making sure that there still is the transport format and protobufs and whatever is all supported.
Yeah, I guess I recommend against, I'm kind of on Arno's side, in terms of interoperability where different organizations are transmitting the data. I think supporting multiple formats is really confusing. Like SPDX supports like 6 different serialization formats or something, and it's super confusing. Like I know there's good reasons that they do that, but it does have a complexity cost. And I think if we can recommend like some interoperable format that's like, I don't care so much whether it's JSON or something else, but like that it's always this one thing, and like almost everyone uses this, and if you want to go off and do something else, like you're on your own, that seems desirable to me. Jay?
Yeah, I thought that that's what we were when we're looking into OSCAL. I thought that was that. God, I'm telling you, OSCAL is something else. I thought that that was what we were attempting to rectify, right? JSON, XML, everything, they can all go into OSCAL, and OSCAL is supposed to be able to take all of those formats and then kick out something that's universally acceptable or can be universally read or used across the spectrum. That was my general understanding of OSCAL and OSCAL's role in taking taking in a lot of this information, and then being able to utilize it across different compliance requirements and security frameworks, providing reporting and everything else. So that was my general thought and understanding, and I hope that that's the case, because if that is the case, then we're heading in the right direction with a lot of that research. If not, I agree. We should probably get on the same sheet of music in terms of formatting and everything else.
Yeah, so there's some elements where like right now, at least OSCAL is a bit more focused on like interop between like not the formats and specifications, more of like I could have a way to say that this salsa requirement maps to these 3 NIST controls, or vice versa, or like this NIST control maps to these 2 salsa requirements. As far as the actual, I think there still needs to be like some sort of translation layer where somebody would say, okay, well, I'm going to consume salsa data and convert it into OSCAL format. Because OSCAL format itself is not really conducive to, and is not really intended for some of those things. So it is, and I think when it comes to a lot of these things, this is where I think also a lot of the tooling is going to come into play of like translating, aggregating some of this information, and some of that. But yeah, I think because I think this is also one of the challenges is how do you, let's say, take information from salsa, pull it out and say, hey, this is proof that meets these OSCAL requirements or whatever, I think is going to be an interesting challenge. And I think it kind of goes back to the thing though, if we have like 12 different formats, then the tool is going to have to support, every tool is going to have to support those 12 different formats as opposed to having one standardized format, at least internally, right? And if folks say, hey, you have some internal format, great. If you want to use this tool, you got to translate it into the other format. I think is probably reasonable.
Yeah, I think we have the power to, in this group and then in the other groups, or at least those that are meeting underneath the OpenSSF banner, right? In terms of all the different frameworks and specs and everything else that's coming out of what we do across the board. I think we have the power to unify under a specific format to kind of prevent a lot of that and create those bridges and parallels to make things that are interoperable. Dare I say, I agree. It can get confusing and wild real quick. Yeah, real quick.
Cool. All right. What else? Is there anything else, folks? I believe that's the, oh, Lauren?
Oh yeah, I wanted to mention on tooling and verification. I think if you have multiple ecosystems and then you have multiple builders, I don't think we can expect every ecosystem like NPM, pipe, pip, and everything to basically be aware of how to verify provenance from different builders. Because at the end of the day, it's not just in toto, it's also how you do key rotation, whether you use DSSE or not. For example, GCB verification looks completely different from, 6-store based verification. So I feel like it would be and you see a lot of efforts already in the ecosystem trying to generate provenance where everyone has to re-implement 6-store for their own ecosystem. That isn't going to scale when you want to do verification because you're going to have different builders. And so I think having like one utility that actually understand how to verify provenance from different builders and making sure this is available to different ecosystems, whether it's through a service or whatever it is. I think that's something that I feel is missing today. I think we can tackle it through the SLSA verifier that we have. If we can decide on like what's the best way to expose this, whether it's an OpenSSF service or it's like someone wants to run it locally through a Docker container to do local verification. But like, if we could be in a state where every ecosystem doesn't have to re-implement and keep track of versioning of different builders, that would be very useful, because what we've seen with the SLSA verifier is that just doing GCB, there were a lot of corner cases. Sometimes they didn't actually follow the specs, to the letter, and this is going to happen. Especially when people try to push products, sometimes it's not, there's some bugs and things like that.
So a question actually, because I'd be interested in folks' thoughts on this, is I was also thinking, because this is also a fairly common theme in some of the in-toto stuff as well, as like what should be also like, do you think something like having something like a verifier that somebody could run, maybe even something that would be a public service that could be useful, but do you also think that we should have libraries for verification, so that if folks, let's say, hey, I have a Java app, great, you could use the Salsa Java verifier library or whatever, which would also probably include stuff like, would probably include the SigStore library and or a notary library, and so on, as well as the Intodo libraries for that? Or do you think that's going to be also a bit of a mess to kind of maintain?
Those are very good questions that Laurent and Michael raised. I don't know, just thinking out loud here, I think it can become very quickly a maintenance nightmare, right? Because the way, I don't know, GCP does it, and then there's Java might do it differently, NPM might do it differently, Python might do it differently. At least for now, until the dust settled and everyone agrees on what's what. I think, but maybe the least we can do is sort of provide like a pluggable interface and say, look, we'll take care of the basics, like checking the metadata inside the provenance themselves. Give us what looks like a provenance. We can verify that stuff for you. And then we can plug in like modular things for how to verify signatures. And then someone writes like a DISI concrete class or whatnot, right? Does this make sense?
Yes, I think that 100% makes sense, and kind of how I would think that this would hopefully sort of work, right? Because I think there's like a couple of things. One is the signature / envelope format, and then followed by like the internal payload and verifying the payload. And for what it's worth, this is something that we've had to implement ourselves in Guac, where we would much rather say, just give us arbitrary documents. Oh, this is a DISI. Okay, cool. Unpack the payload and figure out what payload it is, and then pass it, like, and as opposed to us having to now go in and re-implement ourselves, like, what does an Intodo document look like? Oh, we want to just use the Intodo library. And in fact, okay, great, it's an Intodo document. Great, now what type of Intodo document is it? Oh, it's a Salsa document. Cool, use the Salsa, call out to the Salsa thing, but we don't want to have to do the implementation ourselves to say, okay, look for these fields in this Intodo in this predicate in an Intodo document. And if it matches all these fields, then you have a 100% valid Salsa. We would much rather say, cool, now pass this to the Salsa, verifier, which is managed by the Salsa team or whatever. And I know that kind of comes, just to be clear, as I'm talking about this, I know that all of this comes with the caveat is every single new thing that you add into this is now a new dependency, which is now a new supply chain issue that somebody has to deal with. Any other thoughts, questions, anything about this?
Yeah, I think it'd be great to have library APIs, but realistically, I don't think this is going to work, at least not at the beginning. I mean, I see what happened to SigStore. It's already taking like 1 year to develop a SigStore in each ecosystem. And I think Salsa verification, you multiply this by the number of builders and the number of versions of each builder, and then it just explodes. So maybe the interface is an API, is a library, but under the hood, I doubt it's going to be a library, unless some ecosystems say we only support these 2 builders, or like, or if every if every ecosystem says you have to use our builder and they control it. But if they want to say, oh, you can build on GCP, you can build on GitHub, and maybe on Circle CI and some other things, then I think that looks really hard to scale.
Yeah. And I think there is, so actually, let me let Mark go and let me collect my thoughts.
Sure. I agree with Trishank's comment in the chat. I think right now a lot of the complexity is because the trust model including but not limited to the public key infrastructure, is not standardized. And so there's, each system does its own thing. And so any sort of code that has to support multiple sources has to have like all these special cases. I can foresee a need to have a standardized way of setting up this trust, sort of like we have SSL, and that's now standardized, and like you don't have to do anything special depending on the web server. You don't have to do any sort of special logic. You just know you could do the SSL, and there's a whole certificate chain and roots of trust and how you verify the paths, et cetera. And there's a standard way of getting the certificates, et cetera. I think for provenance and attestations more generally, over time, we will want to develop that and have some standard mechanism for how you transmit attestations, what the roots of trust are, how you verify. And so, and everyone just adopts this standard interface. And so that way it simplifies verification. And it'd be great to work on. It might be a little early right now. We might need to get the first couple things might be messy. And then once we see what kind of patterns emerge, then that might make sense to standardize. Michael?
Yeah, no, definitely agree with you on that. And in fact, actually, I was gonna say, my at least initial thoughts on the verifier would focus a little bit less on the signature piece and the identity piece, and more on just the simpler piece of assuming somebody is giving an IT6 SLSA predicate. Is that actually does it have the right keys and values? Because we've already sort of discovered in some of the tools, some folks are like have typos or misspellings, and so somebody goes and says, "Great, I'm going to ingest this document from the public," and go, "I don't understand why I'm not ingesting it, or why things are breaking, or whatever." And so what we'd love to see is some of that, because we've also seen this in the SBOM world, where a lot of the tools are not actually generating SBOMs that are valid to the specification. They're generating SBOMs that are similar, but don't 100% match the spec from the perspective of like the key value stuff of like, oops, there's a, your thing doesn't, has a name of a build type instead of a URI, right? And stuff like that we probably want to also catch early, so that, that also hurts a lot of the interop. And we've been seeing this with some of the tools like Walk that we're trying to do, is that somebody generates SLSA provenance that looks like SLSA provenance, but not actually SLSA provenance. And it can be difficult to know if it's actually valid. And then, yeah, the other piece of the trust piece is huge. Another thing I think that's being brought up in the in-toto space is a concept which might, I don't know if it's something that SLSA wants to get involved in at all, but it's the idea of like a predicate dictionary, which is this idea of like SLSA would be a predicate, and then you might have something like a SLSA predicate, like people would potentially have mappings into internal data models or to an ontology or something like that, which would then help with some of the mapping back and forth between other standards. I think that's a significantly longer tail item, but something that I know some folks have begun to kind of talk about, like, so that somebody can say, great, I have all of this SLSA data, and something like OSCAL, great, here is a mapping of SLSA provenance data into a combination of OSCAL and some other standard. And that's still somebody else's thing, but it follows a common mapping pattern. So it can do that. Aaron?
Yeah, and just one thing you just mentioned as well around, keeping it really simple for first implementation of, well, does this thing that was produced by a builder or a tool, like, is it actually the format, and is it what we expect it to be? Because if it's broken, then a computer can't even process it, right? So this is actually going to help the tooling and builder platforms and such with development and essentially QA testing right at the lowest level. I think that is a good first step.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. Sean?
So are we envisaging this being much more than just a schema validator for 8.6, or is there some semantic stuff we'd like to kind of get into there as well?
So my 2 cents on it, and this is something that we've been working on with a combination of folks in the CNCF, Guac, in Toto, is short-term schema validator. And 2 parts of the schema validator. One is an IT6 validator, which would be relatively simple. It just checks like, hey, do you have a list of subjects and whatever? And then do you also have a predicate, and the predicate is a valid JSON? And then you would have individual predicate validators for each of those things. So Salsa would be one. I know there's a thing called Sky or something like that some folks are building out. Something like that, I think, would be one. But there are some folks who are starting to ask, like, could we use stuff like what we're seeing in the semantic web and similar? Could we use that or similar ideas to develop what Santiago from Intoto is calling, and I think some other folks are calling what do they call it? A predicate dictionary, where the idea is we could have a bunch of predicates and either have a bunch of ways to map those predicates to other systems. So you could say, okay, great, to map from Salsa to Tool X's internal data model, it looks like this. And so that, tools would not necessarily need to recompile every single time there's a new predicate. They could just take that predicate and just be able to, know that this is a mapping to an internal data model. And then also maybe even longer term, have something that's more akin to, and I know this is a big ask, so I'm not saying that this is like, anywhere, this is years off, but something like Salsa to an ontology, ontology to a data model, so that you could just have, here is the supply chain security ontology, and anybody who supports that mapping, Salsa would say, okay, well, hash maps to checksum in the ontology or something like that. Cool. And then you have a 2-way mapping, and it simplifies certain things. I know it brings up a lot of other problems, but that's one of the things that's being discussed. Trishant?
Yeah, thanks. That's very interesting. I'm glad you talked about it, because I was gonna ask a follow-up question on what you meant by the predicates and ontology and all that good stuff. Is this related to Santiago's idea of building like a typing system for Intoto?
I think it's similar, but not the same. The idea behind the typing one is more of just like, could you have sub groupings inside of an object? So for example, with Salsa, right, you might have something like where you want to define a way in Salsa to say, what I'm expecting here is a URI, right?
Mhm.
In this build type, I'm expecting a URI. And how do you sort of tell the end user in a JSON schema, like that actually this type should be, or in a JSON schema, in a Q schema, in a protobuf or whatever, that this should be considered a URI without needing to actually write a bunch of code that, for every single, language. It's something that, some way of like looking at a schema and being able to kind of figure that out would be useful, so that like folks can know that, like, as an example, you might be able to say, this is a subject type. So you could have the subject type in an Intoto subject while also being in sub elements of an Intoto thing.
Nice.
I don't.
That's interesting, and I'm really curious about the semantic web stuff there. My only concern is that I think the W3C has been trying to do that for like 20 years, to don't no avail. But I'm very curious to see the latest developments.
Yeah, once again, I don't want to kind of derail this any further, but yeah, that's just some stuff that some folks, or at least are interested in it from an outcome perspective of like, it would be great if we could leverage this stuff or use something like this to do some of this stuff, so that folks kind of get that better interop and are also able to kind of say, great, I can just, if let's say, for example, a lot of these tools that come in, if you have something like a predicate dictionary, and as long as it follows the normal predicate dictionary rules, if Salsa generates, when Salsa 2.0 comes out, if the Intoto predicate dictionary version hasn't increased, then great. You could still ingest now SLSA 2.0. You might not have as deep of an understanding. You might be missing a few things here and there, but you could still get value out of it, I think, and parse it. Anyway. Any other items? Yeah, as somebody who's new to the semantic web stuff, I have, as somebody who's really new to it, I've been reading up on it, and there's so much stuff that I do not understand. Just mostly just from, I know a lot of it's like not standard sort of JSON formats. It's like weird, like there's a lot of, but it's interesting stuff, just to be clear. It's just taking a while to grok it. Anybody else have any other agenda items, anything else they wanted to bring up? If not, we can end, or actually, did somebody say something? Oh, okay. If not, we can end 15 minutes early. And just as a reminder, I believe the next meeting we pushed, I think we pushed up the meeting up a week. If you look at the thing here, I believe, so our next meeting is December 15th. And the reason is we don't want to conflict with the Christmas holiday that a lot of folks on this call celebrate. So that'll be on the 15th. Cool. And if there's nothing else, have a good rest of your day. And some of you I'll see tomorrow at tooling. Some of you I'll see later.
Happy Thanksgiving. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, bye.
I guess.
That is a lie. I am in the process of bringing partner work to the